In today's lesson, we are going to discuss the John Adams presidency, particularly the conflicts that Adams faced during his presidency. John Adams was our second president, and he was also our first one-term president. He ran for re-election, but he was beaten by Thomas Jefferson. You'll understand more about why John Adams was not able to be re-elected as we go through this section. So the election of 1796 was following George Washington's departure, and it was between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. These two men were the leaders of separate parties. John Adams was part of the Federalist Party, and Thomas Jefferson represented the Democratic Republican Party. It was a very bitter election with these two former friends dragging each other's names through the mud. And because of the way that we originally elected president and vice president, these two foes had to serve together. John Adams narrowly won the Electoral College. He got the most votes, so he became president, and Thomas Jefferson becomes vice president. We can already see the division among the regions. New England and our northern states voted for Adams, while the South went for Thomas Jefferson. So one of the first conflicts that John Adams had to face was the XYZ Affair. This was with France. It's called the XYZ Affair because that is what we named the three French officials who demanded bribes from the United States in order to try and negotiate. The background of the XYZ Affair was that France was annoyed with us after signing Jay's Treaty with France to try and normalize our relations with them. Obviously, we had declared ourselves neutral in the fight between France and Great Britain, well, the war between France and Great Britain. So France began seizing American ships, particularly ships that they knew were trading with Great Britain. So Adams sends 3 men to Paris to negotiate peace. He sends a delegation. The 3 French officials who meet these men then demanded bribes for us to be able to speak with them. You can imagine today if we were conducting foreign relations with a nation and they tried to blackmail us and bribe us into being able to talk with them. It was super disrespectful to the United States, and something that France did because they knew we were such a young nation and really wouldn't have the ability to retaliate. John Adams broke off these negotiations, and from that point forward, France and the U.S. entered into a quasi-war. What we mean by that is that the war was undeclared, but out at sea, French and American ships would be attacking one another. Our relations with France was really bad. We broke off like official relations with them, and we would be in a state of quasi-war with them for several years. Another conflict that John Adams faced was honestly brought on to him by himself. John Adams supported the Alien and Sedition Acts. These acts were passed through Congress by a Federalist majority, and then John Adams signed them into law. The Alien and Sedition Acts had 2 parts. The Alien Act allowed the president to arrest and deport immigrants without a trial, and pushed up the amount of time you had to live in the United States to 14 years to become a citizen. This was seen as a dirty political move because most of the new immigrants who came to the United States were voting for the Democratic Republican Party. So the motivations of the Federalists were to limit support for their opposing party. The Sedition Act was the really nasty part. There was a lot of conflict and strife and nastiness in politics. Okay, I'm sorry for that interruption, but there was a lot of fighting back and forth between the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists during this time. So there was a lot of like nastiness about John Adams being printed in newspapers, and he was fed up with it. So he supported the Sedition Act, which made it a crime for citizens to publicly denounce the federal government. I hope that you are all sitting here thinking, wait, our government can't do that. And you're right, it violates the Constitution, specifically our First Amendment freedom of speech. So both of these acts targeted the Democratic Republican Party and were unconstitutional, and that led to a lot of conflict. They were eventually repealed, but not before Thomas Jefferson got involved as John Adams' vice president. Jefferson and Madison wrote the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. They did write these anonymously, but they were in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts. They publicly called them unconstitutional, but the important part is that they introduced the idea of nullification. Nullification is the idea that states have the power to invalidate federal laws. So if federal law is unconstitutional, then the states have the power to basically ignore them. If we have a union full of states that can pick and choose federal law as they please, do we really have a union? And that's the question that nullification brought into the picture. We are going to talk and deal with nullification all throughout the rest of this course, and it's going to be the center of many political arguments.